I thought I knew everything about managing my finances. After all, at 45, I've been handling my own money for nearly 3 decades. But last Tuesday morning, when I called First National to dispute a charge on my credit card, the customer service representative said something that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Alexander, we've had several calls about your account recently, from someone claiming to be concerned about your mental capacity to handle your finances. Before I reveal what really happened, please hit that subscribe button and like. I love hearing from viewers. What's your city? My name is Sarah Alexander, I'm 45 years old, and I never imagined that someone I trusted would try to sabotage my financial independence." The bank representative, though professional, seemed hesitant to give me details over the phone. All she would say is that multiple calls had been made over the past month, each one suggesting I was becoming confused and unable to make sound financial decisions. The caller had even provided specific examples of supposed erratic spending and claimed to be worried about my well-being. I sat in my kitchen that morning, staring at my coffee growing cold, trying to process what I'd just heard. My hands were actually shaking as I hung up the phone. Who would do this? And why? My financial records were impeccable. I paid my bills on time, maintained excellent credit, and had been steadily building my retirement savings. The accusations were not just false, they were deliberately malicious. That evening, when my husband David Alexander came home from his job at the municipal water department, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and credit reports. David and I have been married for 22 years, and he knows me well enough to read my moods instantly. His weathered face, lined from years of outdoor work, creased with concern when he saw my expression. "Sarah, what's wrong?" he asked, setting down his lunchbox and immediately coming over to sit beside me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Someone has been calling our bank," I said, my voice barely steady. "They've been telling the customer service department that I'm mentally incompetent to handle our accounts. Multiple calls, David, over the past month." David's jaw tightened. In all our years together, I've rarely seen him truly angry, but his eyes flashed with protective fury. "What exactly did they tell the bank?" I explained everything the representative had shared with me, watching David's expression grow darker with each detail. The caller had apparently been very convincing, providing what sounded like intimate knowledge of our spending patterns and even referencing specific purchases I'd made recently. "This isn't random, David," I continued. "Whoever is doing this knows details about our life, our spending habits. They mentioned the new washing machine I bought last month and the weekend trip we took to celebrate our anniversary. This is someone close to us." The realization hit both of us simultaneously. The circle of people who knew those intimate details about our finances and recent purchases was very small. My best friend Janet Morrison immediately came to mind. Janet had been over just 2 weeks ago, and we'd talked extensively about money management. I'd even shown her my new budgeting system and mentioned how proud I was of staying on track with our savings goals. Janet and I had been friends for 8 years, ever since we met at a community gardening class. She was going through a difficult divorce at the time, and I'd tried to be supportive, even helping her navigate some of her own financial challenges. Janet was smart, articulate, and knew exactly how to present herself as a concerned friend to bank representatives. But why would Janet do this? What could she possibly gain by undermining my credibility with our financial institutions? The next morning, I called my longtime friend and neighbor, Patricia Chen. Patricia lives just 3 houses down from us and works as a paralegal at a local law firm. If anyone would know how to handle this situation properly, it would be her. Patricia and I had developed a close friendship over the past 5 years, bonding over our shared love of mystery novels and weekend farmers market visits. "Patricia, I need your help," I said when she answered the phone. Someone has been making false reports about me to my bank, and I think I know who it is. Patricia's response was immediate and reassuring. Come over right now. Bring whatever documentation you have. This is serious, Sarah, and we need to handle it carefully. Within an hour, I was sitting in Patricia's sunny living room, spreading out my financial records on her coffee table. Patricia listened intently as I explained the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions in her precise, professional manner. Her dark eyes were sharp with concentration as she took notes on a legal pad. The timing is interesting, Patricia observed. You said these calls started about a month ago. Has anything significant happened in your relationship with Janet recently? Any conflicts or changes? I thought carefully. Actually, yes. About 6 weeks ago, Janet asked me for a loan. $5,000. She said it was for car repairs, but when I asked for more details, she became evasive. I told her I needed to discuss it with David first, and she got upset. She said she thought she could count on me as a friend, and that asking David made it seem like I didn't have control over my own money. Patricia raised an eyebrow. And did you give her the loan? No. David and I talked about it, and we decided that $5,000 was more than we were comfortable lending, especially since she couldn't give us a clear timeline for repayment. When I told Janet our decision, she was cold about it. Said she understood, but her whole demeanor changed. That's a significant amount of money, Patricia noted, and the timing aligns perfectly with when the calls to your bank started. Sarah, I think Janet might be trying to build a case that you're financially irresponsible or incompetent. If she could establish that narrative with your bank, she might be planning to approach David directly, positioning herself as the person who noticed your supposed problems. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was ugly. Janet, whom I'd trusted and supported through her divorce, whom I'd welcomed into my home countless times, had apparently decided to retaliate against my refusal to lend her money by trying to destroy my financial reputation. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. Sarah, there's something else we need to consider. If Janet is making these calls, she knows intimate details about your banking habits. When did you last share financial information with her? The question hit me like a cold splash of water. Oh no, I whispered, pressing my palm against my forehead. Last month, when she was asking for the loan, I was trying to be transparent about why I couldn't help. I showed her our bank statements to explain that most of our money was tied up in the house renovation and David's medical bills from his surgery last year. What exactly did you show her? Everything, I said, feeling sick. Account numbers, balances, our spending patterns. I wanted her to understand that it wasn't that I didn't want to help her, but that we genuinely couldn't afford to lend that much money right then. Patricia's expression grew grave. Sarah, that means Janet has all the information she needs to sound credible when she calls your bank. She can reference specific transactions, account details, dates. No wonder the bank took her calls seriously. I buried my face in my hands. I trusted her completely. She's been my closest friend since the divorce. She helped me paint the kitchen, watch the house when David and I went to visit his parents. How could she do this? People sometimes reveal their true character when they don't get what they want, Patricia said gently. The question now is what we're going to do about it. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. Mom, can you call me? Something weird happened at work today. I looked at Patricia, my stomach dropping. It's David. Something happened at his work. Call him back, Patricia said. This might be connected. David answered on the first ring. Mom, the strangest thing happened. Janet showed up at the restaurant today during my lunch break. She said she was worried about you, that she thought you might be having some kind of financial crisis and weren't telling me about it. My blood ran cold. What exactly did she say? She claimed you've been making unusual purchases, forgetting to pay bills, and acting confused about money. She said she was concerned you might be developing some kind of memory problem and that maybe I should take a more active role in helping you manage your finances. Mom, she knew details about your bank accounts that seemed way too specific for casual conversation. Patricia was already scribbling notes, having heard David's voice through the phone. She gestured for me to put the call on speaker. David, it's Patricia Miller. I'm here with your mother, and we need to tell you what's really going on. We spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything to David. I watched his expression change from confusion to anger as the full scope of Janet's manipulation became clear. She played it perfectly, David said, pacing around Patricia's living room. She presented herself as the concerned friend who noticed problems that the family was too close to see. If I hadn't talked to you first, I might have believed her. That was clearly her strategy, Patricia agreed. Isolate Sarah by making everyone around her question her competence, then position herself as the solution to the problem she created. I felt overwhelmed by the betrayal. But why? All of this over a loan request? It seems so extreme. $5,000 is significant, Patricia said. But I suspect there's more to this story. People don't usually go to these lengths unless the stakes are higher than they initially appear. David stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Mom, when Janet asked for the loan, did she mention why she needed exactly $5,000? She said car repairs, but when I pressed for details, she got vague and defensive. Car repairs don't usually cost $5,000 unless it's something major, David said. And if her car was really broken down, wouldn't she have taken it somewhere for an estimate? Did you ever see her car having problems? I thought back over the past few months. Actually, no. Her car seemed fine every time I saw it. And now that you mention it, she never brought up car troubles again after I said no to the loan. If someone's car really needed $5,000 in repairs, wouldn't that be an ongoing issue? Patricia nodded. David's right. The car story was likely fabricated. Janet needed that money for something else, something she couldn't tell you about honestly. But what could be worth destroying our friendship over? I asked. David sat down across from me, his expression serious. Mom, I think we need to consider that Janet might be in some kind of serious financial trouble. The kind of trouble that makes people desperate. What do you mean? I mean the kind of trouble where $5,000 isn't just wanted, it's desperately needed. And when desperate people don't get what they need through normal channels, they sometimes try to create alternative solutions. Patricia was already ahead of us. David's suggesting that Janet might have planned to establish your supposed incompetence, then approach him as the concerned friend who could help manage your finances. Once she had some level of access or influence over your accounts, she could find ways to get the money she needed. I finished, the full horror of it sinking in. The room fell silent as we all processed the implications. This wasn't just about a friend's hurt feelings over a declined loan. This was about someone I trusted completely orchestrating an elaborate scheme to gain access to my financial resources. But just as we were beginning to understand the scope of Janet's plan, my phone rang again. This time, it was Janet herself. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the heavy silence like a blade. Janet's name glowed on the screen, and my stomach dropped to my feet. After everything we'd just discussed, seeing her name felt surreal, almost menacing. Don't answer it, David said immediately, but I was already staring at the phone, paralyzed by conflicting emotions. Actually, Patricia said thoughtfully. Maybe she should. We have information now that Janet doesn't know we have. This could be an opportunity to understand what she's really planning. My hand trembled as I held the phone. I don't know if I can pretend everything's normal. What if she can tell I know? You're stronger than you think, David said, moving closer. And we're right here with you. The phone continued ringing. In a few more seconds, it would go to voicemail. I took a deep breath and swiped to answer. Hi, Janet, I managed, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Oh, thank goodness you answered. Janet's familiar voice flooded through the speaker, but now it sounded different to me, more calculated. I've been worried sick about you. Are you okay? Worried? Why would you be worried? I asked, genuinely curious about what angle she was taking. Well, I ran into David at the grocery store yesterday, and he seemed really concerned about you. He mentioned you've been having some confusion with your banking lately. My blood ran cold. David's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously, mouthing, I never saw her. The lie was so smooth, so convincing, that if I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed her completely. David mentioned that? I asked carefully. He did, and honestly, it got me thinking about some things I've noticed too. Remember last week, when you couldn't remember where you put your checkbook? And you mentioned forgetting your PIN at the ATM? I'm wondering if maybe these little incidents are adding up to something more serious. Patricia was taking notes, writing down every lie Janet told. I watched her pen move across the paper, documenting this elaborate fabrication in real time. I hadn't really thought about it that way, I said, playing along while my heart hammered against my ribs. That's exactly what concerns me, Janet continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Sometimes when we're in the middle of these situations, we can't see them clearly. That's why friends exist, right? To help us when we can't help ourselves. The manipulation was breathtaking. She was systematically building a case for my incompetence, using fictional conversations and imagined incidents to create a narrative of decline. And she was doing it so skillfully that I could see how someone might actually fall for it. What do you think I should do? I asked, morbidly curious about where this was leading. Well, I've actually been doing some research. There are ways to set up additional safeguards on your accounts, people who can help monitor things to make sure nothing goes wrong. I'd be happy to come with you to the bank to discuss options. Sometimes having a friend there to remember the details can be really helpful. There it was. The end game. She wanted to get me to the bank, presumably to add herself as some kind of authorized user, or to establish herself as a concerned party in my financial affairs. David looked furious, his hands clenched into fists. Patricia continued writing, capturing every word of Janet's scheme. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, stalling for time while I tried to process the magnitude of her betrayal. I could drive you tomorrow morning if you'd like. First thing, when you're fresh and alert. I really think taking some proactive steps would give both of us peace of mind. The irony was staggering. She was the source of all the banking confusion, and now she was positioning herself as the solution. It was like an arsonist offering to help rebuild the house they'd burned down. Let me think about it and call you back, I said. Of course, but don't think too long, okay? Sometimes with these cognitive issues, waiting can make things worse. The sooner we get some support systems in place, the better. Cognitive issues. She was planting that phrase deliberately, building her case one conversation at a time. After I hung up, the three of us sat in stunned silence. The calculated nature of Janet's manipulation was more chilling than anything we'd imagined. She's been planning this for weeks, Patricia said, looking at her notes. Every piece fits together perfectly. David stood up abruptly. We have to stop her before she tries this with someone else. Someone who might not have family paying attention. But as we discussed our next steps, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Janet, but what I read made my blood freeze. Just spoke with your neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She's noticed some concerning changes too. I think we need to move faster on getting you help. Mrs. Henderson was real. Janet was expanding her web of lies beyond just the bank. I stared at the text message, my hands trembling. Janet wasn't just targeting my bank accounts anymore. She was spreading her lies throughout my neighborhood, creating a web of false witnesses to my supposed mental decline. What is it? David asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the message. His face darkened as he read it aloud for Patricia to hear. This is escalating fast, Patricia said, setting down her pen. She's building a case from multiple sources now. If enough people start believing her story about your cognitive abilities, it could become very difficult to prove otherwise. The weight of Janet's manipulation was starting to sink in. It wasn't just about money anymore. She was systematically undermining my reputation, my independence, my very credibility as a functioning adult. Mrs. Henderson has lived next door to me for 8 years, I said, trying to process this new development. She's seen me every week when I tend my garden, when I get my mail. How could Janet convince her that I'm suddenly incompetent? David sat back down, running his hands through his hair. The same way she almost convinced you. She's probably telling Mrs. Henderson specific stories, pointing out normal things as evidence of decline. Maybe she said you forgot to bring in your trash cans one week, or that you seemed confused about something trivial. Janet does walk through the neighborhood every morning, I realized. She could easily strike up conversations, plant seeds of doubt. Mrs. Henderson is in her 70s herself. She might be susceptible to suggestions about age-related decline. Patricia looked up from her notes. This changes our timeline. If Janet is actively recruiting neighbors as witnesses to your supposed incompetence, we need to act before she builds an even stronger case. The phone rang again, making all 3 of us jump. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It's her again, I whispered. Answer it, David said firmly. But this time, don't play along. Challenge her directly. My heart was pounding as I picked up the phone. Hello, Janet? I'm so glad you answered. I just got off the phone with Mrs. Henderson, and we're both really worried about you. She mentioned that you seemed disoriented when you were getting your mail yesterday, like you couldn't remember which mailbox was yours. The accusation was so absurd it almost made me laugh. I'd been getting mail from the same box for nearly a decade. But I could see how Janet might twist a moment of me checking the address on a package, or sorting through multiple pieces of mail, into evidence of confusion. Janet, I need to ask you something directly, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Have you been calling my bank? There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more defensive. I've been concerned about you. You know that. Sometimes when people are struggling, they need advocates who can help explain their situation to financial institutions. So you have been calling them? I've made some inquiries, yes. As your friend, I felt it was important to make sure you were getting the support you needed. David was making encouraging gestures, urging me to press further. Patricia continued taking notes, documenting every word of this conversation. What kind of inquiries? I asked. Just general questions about what resources might be available for someone in your situation. Elder care services, account monitoring options, that sort of thing. She was being deliberately vague, but her admission was enough. She had been calling my bank, just as we'd suspected. Janet, I want you to stop calling my bank. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own finances." "Of course you are," she said quickly. "I was just trying to be proactive." Sometimes it helps to have information about available resources before you actually need them. But her voice had taken on that same patronizing tone she'd used earlier, the one that suggested she didn't really believe what she was saying. "I also want you to stop discussing my personal affairs with the neighbors," I continued, feeling more confident with each word. "I'm not discussing your personal affairs. Mrs. Henderson and I were just chatting, and she mentioned her own concerns. I simply validated that I'd noticed some similar things." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I could see how she'd been getting away with it. She never quite admitted to anything concrete, always framing her actions as concern or coincidence. After I hung up, David looked at me with something like pride. "You did good, but she's not going to stop," he said. "If anything, confronting her directly might make her accelerate whatever she's planning." Patricia had been quiet during the call, but now she looked up with a grim expression. "There's something else we need to consider," she said. "If Janet has been building this narrative with multiple sources, she might be planning to file some kind of formal complaint or request for intervention. Adult Protective Services, a competency hearing, something official." The thought made my blood run cold. Can she do that? If she presents enough evidence from enough sources, she could potentially trigger an investigation, Patricia explained. Even if you're completely competent, the process itself would be invasive and damaging. My phone buzzed with another text. This time, it was from Janet again, but the message was different in tone. "I understand you're upset, but please don't shut out people who care about you. Sometimes the people who need help most are the least able to see it themselves." The implied threat was clear. She was positioning my resistance to her interference as further evidence of my supposed decline. I showed David and Patricia the text, watching their faces darken as they read it. "She's doubling down," David said, shaking his head. "This is textbook manipulation. She's trying to make you doubt yourself while simultaneously justifying her actions to anyone who might question them later." Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but troubled. "The timing of this text is telling, too. She sent it right after you confronted her, which means she was prepared for pushback. This isn't spontaneous concern, Margaret. This feels calculated." I stared at the message, reading it over and over. The words seemed so reasonable on the surface, so caring. But underneath, I could feel the sharp edge of threat. Janet was telling me that my resistance would only prove her point. "I keep second-guessing myself," I admitted. "What if I really have been forgetting things? What if some of the things she's noticed are actually real problems?" David moved closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Mom, we've been over this. You're sharp as ever. You caught on to her scheme before any of us did. You remembered specific details about your conversations with the bank that helped us figure out what was happening? Does that sound like someone with cognitive issues?" "But the keys," I said weakly. "I did lose my keys that one time." "Everyone loses their keys," Patricia interjected. "I lost mine twice last week. That doesn't make me incompetent." My phone rang, startling all three of us. Janet's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer it," David said immediately. But I found myself reaching for the phone anyway. "I need to know what she's planning. If I don't talk to her, she'll just find other ways to build her case." I answered, before either of them could stop me. "Margaret, I'm so glad you picked up." Janet's voice came through, syrupy with false warmth. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have overstepped. I was just so worried about you." "Worried about what, specifically?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker so David and Patricia could hear. Well, you seemed so confused during our call. And getting angry with me for trying to help, that's just not like you. The Margaret I know has always been grateful when friends look out for her. There it was again, that subtle implication that my reaction was the problem, not her behavior. I'm not confused, Janet. I'm upset that you've been calling my bank and discussing my personal business with neighbors. Oh, honey, I think you're misremembering what I said. I made one quick call to ask general questions about services, and Mrs. Henderson brought up her concerns to me, not the other way around. David was making frantic hand gestures, mouthing, "She's lying," and pointing at the notes Patricia had taken during our previous conversation. Janet, I need you to stop contacting my bank entirely. No more calls, no more questions about services or anything else related to my accounts. There was a pause, and when Janet spoke again, her voice had lost some of its artificial sweetness. Margaret, I understand you want to maintain your independence. But sometimes our loved ones can see things we can't see ourselves. Maybe you should consider that the people who care about you might have a clearer perspective. The condescension was unmistakable now. Patricia was scribbling notes, documenting everything Janet was saying. I appreciate your concern, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I'm managing just fine on my own. Are you, though? Janet's question hung in the air like a challenge. Because from where I'm sitting, this whole conversation is concerning. Getting paranoid about friends trying to help, becoming defensive when people express legitimate worries, these can be signs of... She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Signs of what, Janet? I pressed, feeling anger rise in my chest. Well, I'm not a doctor, but sometimes when people start declining, they become resistant to help. It's actually quite common. David looked like he was about to grab the phone from me, his face flushed with anger. Patricia put a restraining hand on his arm while continuing to write. I'm not declining, and I'm not being paranoid. I'm being protective of my privacy, which is my right. Of course it is, Janet said quickly. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I just think it might be worth having a conversation with someone objective, someone who could assess whether there are any concerns worth addressing. There it was. The real agenda, finally coming into focus. What kind of someone? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Well, there are professionals who specialize in these situations. Social workers, elder care specialists, people who can provide an unbiased evaluation and help determine what supports might be beneficial. My hands were shaking now, but my voice remained steady. Janet, I want to be very clear. I do not want or need any kind of evaluation. I do not want you to contact anyone on my behalf, and I do not want you to continue discussing my personal affairs with anyone else. Another pause, longer this time. I hear what you're saying, Margaret, but I hope you'll understand that if I truly believe someone I care about is in danger of making poor decisions, I have to consider what the right thing to do might be. The threat was explicit now. She was telling me that she planned to move forward regardless of my wishes. Janet, are you threatening me? Of course not. I would never threaten you. I'm simply saying that people who care about each other sometimes have to make difficult decisions. I hope it doesn't come to that. The call ended, leaving the three of us staring at each other in stunned silence. Patricia looked up from her notes, her expression grim. She's going to file a complaint, probably within the next few days. The silence stretched between us as the weight of Janet's threat settled over the room. David was pacing now, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor, while Patricia continued scribbling notes with fierce concentration. So, what exactly does that mean? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. When she files a complaint, what happens? Patricia set down her pen and looked at me directly. It depends on where she files it and what she claims. If she goes to Adult Protective Services, they're required to investigate. They'll want to interview you, probably visit your home, review your finances if they think there's cause. The room felt like it was spinning slightly. I gripped the arm of my chair to steady myself. But that's insane, David said, stopping mid-pace. Mom is clearly fine. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with her can see that. That's what we're banking on, Patricia replied. But Janet seems to have been building a case. The calls to the bank, whatever other documentation she might have been collecting, she's not doing this impulsively. I thought about all the recent interactions with Janet, trying to remember details that had seemed innocent at the time. The questions about my medications, her insistence on helping with grocery shopping, the way she'd started showing up unannounced more frequently. She's been planning this for weeks, I said, the realization hitting me like a cold wave. Maybe months. All those times she offered to help with errands when she seemed so concerned about me managing things alone? David sat down heavily in the chair across from me. What kind of person does that? Pretends to be your friend while secretly trying to prove you're incompetent? Someone who genuinely believes she's helping, Patricia said quietly. That's what makes this so complicated. I don't think Janet is being malicious. I think she's convinced herself that she's protecting you from yourself. The thought made my stomach turn. But I haven't done anything to suggest I can't manage my own life. I pay my bills, I take care of my house, I make my own decisions. Have you made any financial decisions lately that she might have disagreed with? Patricia asked, pen poised over her notepad again. I considered this. I bought a new car last month. Nothing fancy, just replaced my old sedan. And I've been thinking about doing some home improvements, updating the kitchen. Did you discuss these things with Janet? I mentioned the car when she commented on it in my driveway. She seemed surprised that I'd made such a big purchase without consulting anyone. David shook his head. You don't need to consult anyone about buying a car, Mom. You're an adult. I know that, and you know that, but Janet apparently sees it differently. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. She made some comment about how car salesmen take advantage of older buyers, how I should have brought someone with me to negotiate. Patricia was writing again. What about the kitchen renovation? How did that come up? I was looking at some design magazines when she stopped by last week. She asked if I was planning something, and I mentioned I was considering it. She got very concerned about contractors and costs, said I should be careful about people trying to overcharge me. Classic setup, Patricia muttered. Plant seeds of doubt about your judgment, then position herself as the voice of reason. The phone rang, making all three of us jump. I looked at the caller ID and felt my heart sink. It's Janet again. Don't answer it, David said immediately. Actually, I think you should, Patricia countered. But put it on speaker again. Let's hear what she has to say now that she's had time to think. With trembling fingers, I accepted the call and activated the speaker. Margaret, I hope I didn't upset you earlier. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have come across more forcefully than I intended. Her tone was different now, softer, more conciliatory. It reminded me of the Janet I thought I knew, the one who had been my friend for 15 years. I appreciate you calling back, I said carefully. I want you to know that everything I said comes from a place of genuine care and concern. You're important to me, Margaret. Your well-being matters to me. David was making a rolling motion with his hand, urging me to respond, but I wasn't sure what to say. I understand that, Janet. But I also need you to understand that I'm capable of making my own decisions. Of course you are. I've never suggested otherwise. I just think sometimes we all benefit from having people in our lives who can offer perspective, especially as we navigate changes that come with getting older. There was something in her phrasing that bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. What kind of changes are you referring to? Well, things like judgment calls about major purchases, decisions about home modifications, managing complex financial matters. These are areas where having a trusted advisor can be really valuable. Patricia was writing furiously now, underlining certain words with sharp strokes. Janet, I need to ask you something directly. Have you contacted anyone else about your concerns regarding my well-being? The pause was long enough to be telling. Margaret, I think we should have this conversation in person. There are nuances here that are difficult to discuss over the phone. That's not an answer to my question. I know you're upset, and I understand why. But I hope you'll give me a chance to explain my perspective. Could I come over this evening? We could sit down together, just the two of us, and talk through all of this. I looked at David and Patricia, both of whom were shaking their heads vigorously. I don't think that's a good idea right now, Janet. Please, Margaret, I think if we could just talk face to face, we could clear up these misunderstandings. I could explain why I've been so worried, and you could help me understand why you're feeling defensive. The word defensive stung, particularly because part of me wondered if there was truth to it. I'm not being defensive. I'm being protective of my autonomy. I hear you saying that, but sometimes when we're feeling overwhelmed or uncertain, we can interpret offers of help as threats to our independence. Patricia had stopped writing and was staring at the phone with an expression of pure fury. I'm not feeling overwhelmed or uncertain, Janet. Of course not, but you'll forgive me if I'm having trouble reconciling that with some of the concerning behaviors I've observed recently. What concerning behaviors? Well, your suspicious reaction to my bank inquiry, for instance. And now this resistance to having a simple conversation with a friend who cares about you. These aren't the responses I would expect from someone who is feeling confident and secure. The conversation was making me feel dizzy. Every response I gave seemed to become evidence of the very thing Janet was suggesting. Janet, I think we should end this call now. Margaret, please don't shut me out. I'm trying to help you see that there might be some validity to my concerns. Isolation isn't healthy, especially when it involves cutting off people who want to support you. David stood up abruptly and moved toward the phone, but I held up a hand to stop him. I'm not isolating myself. I'm setting boundaries with someone who has violated my privacy and is now trying to manipulate me into accepting help I don't want or need. I understand that's how you see it, but I hope you'll consider the possibility that your perception of the situation might not be entirely accurate. The call ended with a click, leaving us once again in heavy silence. Patricia looked up from her notes, her face pale. She's definitely filing a complaint, probably tomorrow. The weight of Janet's words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stared at the phone long after the dial tone had faded, trying to process what had just happened. Every response I'd given had somehow been twisted into evidence of my supposed incompetence. It was masterful in a terrifying way. She's good at this, I said quietly, more to myself than to David or Patricia. Patricia looked up from her legal pad, pen still poised. What do you mean? The way she turned everything around made me sound paranoid and defensive while positioning herself as the concerned friend just trying to help. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. By the end of that conversation, even I was starting to question myself. David moved back to his chair, his jaw tight. That's exactly what she wanted. It's called gaslighting, Margaret. Make you doubt your own perceptions so you'll accept her version of reality. The term hit me like a slap. I'd heard it before, of course, but never applied to my own life. Never thought it could happen to someone like me, someone educated and independent. The realization was both enlightening and deeply unsettling. But why? The question came out as barely a whisper. We've been friends for 15 years. Why would Janet want to do this to me? Patricia set down her pen and leaned forward. From what I heard on that call, she genuinely believes she's helping you. That almost makes it worse, because there's no reasoning with someone who's convinced they're saving you from yourself. I thought about all the conversations Janet and I had shared over the years, all the lunches and coffee dates, the way she'd been there after my divorce. Had there always been this underlying current of her thinking she knew better than me? Had I been so grateful for her friendship that I'd missed the signs? She mentioned concerning behaviors, I said, trying to recall her exact words. What do you think she meant by that? David and Patricia exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. What? What aren't you telling me? Patricia cleared her throat. When she was talking about your suspicious reaction to her bank inquiry and your resistance to conversation, she was building a case. Those are the kinds of things that get documented in Adult Protective Services reports. The room felt like it was spinning. Adult Protective Services. The phrase conjured images of elderly people being removed from their homes, of court-appointed guardians taking over someone's entire life. I was 58 years old, healthy, financially stable. How had I ended up here? I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. David reached for my arm. Margaret, don't go anywhere alone right now. If Janet is planning to file a complaint and she sees you acting erratically or distressed in public, it could be used against you. The paranoia in his statement should have sounded ridiculous, but instead, it felt like cold, hard sense. I was now living in a world where taking a walk to clear my head could be interpreted as evidence of mental instability. I sank back into my chair, feeling trapped in my own life. This is insane. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was whether to replant my garden this spring. Now I'm afraid to leave my own house. Patricia reached across and squeezed my hand. We're not going to let this happen, but we need to be smart about how we handle it. What does being smart look like? I asked. First, we document everything. Every interaction you've had with Janet, every phone call, every time she's shown up unannounced. We create a timeline that shows a pattern of invasive behavior on her part, not concerning behavior on yours. The thought of dissecting 15 years of friendship, looking for signs of manipulation and control, made me feel sick, but I nodded. Second, we gather character references. People who can speak to your competence and stability. Your doctor, maybe some other friends, colleagues from before you retired. Janet has probably already talked to some of our mutual friends, I realized with growing horror. She's probably been sharing her concerns about me for weeks, maybe months. David's expression darkened. If she has, then we need to know what she's been saying and to whom. The scope of what we were facing began to crystallize. This wasn't just about stopping one complaint to one agency. Janet had likely been laying groundwork for this for some time, carefully building a narrative about my declining competence. The bank call might have been just the latest step in a longer campaign. There's something else, Patricia said, consulting her notes. The way she kept trying to come over here tonight, insisting on a face-to-face conversation. That felt urgent to me. Urgent how? Like she needs something from you before she files the complaint. Maybe she wants to record you saying something she can use, or maybe she needs to observe some behavior she can document. The idea that Janet might be planning to secretly record our conversation sent a chill through me. How long had I been trusting someone who was potentially documenting my every word and action? "We need to call her bluff," I said suddenly. Both David and Patricia looked at me with surprise. "What do you mean?" Patricia asked. "She's counting on me being afraid, on me backing down and accepting her help to make this go away. But what if I don't? What if I make the first move?" David leaned forward, his expression shifting from protective concern to something more calculating. "What kind of first move are you talking about?" I stood up and began pacing, the idea crystallizing as I moved. Instead of waiting for Janet to file a complaint about my competence, what if I go to Adult Protective Services myself? What if I request a voluntary assessment? Patricia's eyebrows shot up. "That's actually brilliant. You'd be controlling the narrative from the start." "Exactly. I walk in there as a competent adult who's concerned about a friend's invasive behavior, not as someone being reported by a concerned citizen. I tell them about the bank calls, about her attempts to gain access to my finances, about the pattern of boundary crossing." David nodded slowly. "It flips the whole situation. Instead of you being investigated as a victim, Janet becomes the one whose behavior is questionable." The more I thought about it, the more empowered I felt. For days, I'd been reacting to Janet's moves, feeling like a chess piece being pushed around the board. But I could make my own moves too. "There's something else," I said, turning back to face them. "I think Janet's been testing me. All those little comments about my forgetfulness, the way she'd correct me about dates or conversations we'd had." "I always assumed I was just getting older, that my memory wasn't as sharp as it used to be." Patricia frowned. "What do you mean, testing you?" "She'd tell me I'd agreed to something I knew I hadn't agreed to, or insist I'd forgotten a conversation that I was certain never happened. When I'd push back, she'd get this concerned look and say something like, 'Are you sure? You seemed so definite when we talked about it.'" David's jaw tightened. That's gaslighting. I didn't want to believe it was intentional. Janet's been my friend for 15 years. But looking back now, there's a pattern. She's been undermining my confidence in my own memory and judgment for months. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank back into my chair, feeling the betrayal all over again, but deeper this time. It wasn't just that Janet had made some phone calls or filed a complaint. She'd been systematically eroding my sense of reality. "The garden," I said suddenly. "What about it?" Patricia asked. "Remember I told you that 3 days ago my biggest worry was whether to replant my garden? Janet's the one who told me I'd already decided not to replant it this year. She said we'd discussed it, and I'd mentioned how overwhelming garden maintenance was becoming." I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to sort through the memories. "But I love my garden. I look forward to spring planting every year." There's no way I would have decided not to replant without really thinking it through, and I definitely would have remembered making that decision. David looked furious. "She's been setting you up for this for months, creating a pattern she could point to." The scope of Janet's manipulation was staggering. How many small moments of self-doubt had she planted? How many times had I questioned my own memory because she seemed so certain about her version of events? "I need to write all of this down," I said, reaching for a notepad. "Every instance I can remember where she contradicted my memory or made me doubt myself." Patricia moved to sit beside me. "We'll help you remember. Sometimes it's easier when someone else asks the right questions." For the next hour, we reconstructed months of subtle manipulation. The time Janet insisted I'd asked her to handle scheduling my dentist appointment, even though I distinctly remembered wanting to call myself. The afternoon she claimed I'd seemed confused about what day it was, when I'd simply mixed up whether the grocery store was having their sale on Tuesday or Wednesday. The way she'd started carrying a small notebook, claiming it helped her keep track of our conversations, because she was getting so forgetful. But now I wondered if she'd been documenting my supposed confusion instead. "This is methodical," David observed, looking over the list we'd compiled. "She's been building a case against your competence for at least 6 months. The betrayal felt fresh with each memory we uncovered, but alongside the hurt, I felt something else growing. Anger. Clean, righteous anger at being manipulated by someone I'd trusted completely. "She underestimated me," I said, capping the pen and setting down the notepad. "She thought I'd be too confused or too scared to fight back effectively." Patricia smiled grimly. "That was her mistake." We spent another hour planning my approach to adult protective services. I would call first thing in the morning and request a meeting. I'd bring our timeline of Janet's behavior, the documentation about the bank calls, and a clear statement about my concerns regarding her attempts to gain control over my affairs. It was nearly midnight when David and Patricia finally prepared to leave. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary under siege, and more like a headquarters where we'd planned a counterattack. "Are you going to be okay tonight?" David asked, giving me a long hug at the door. "I think so. For the first time in days, I feel like I have some control over what happens next." Patricia hugged me too. "Call if you need anything. And remember, don't engage with Janet if she comes by or calls. Everything goes through official channels now." After they left, I double-checked all my locks and settled into bed with a cup of tea. The adrenaline from our planning session was wearing off, leaving me exhausted but oddly peaceful. I had a plan. More importantly, I had people in my corner who believed in my competence and were willing to fight for me. I was just drifting off to sleep when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Janet's name, and my heart rate immediately spiked. Following Patricia's advice, I let it go to voicemail, but when it rang again immediately, and then a third time, I began to worry that something might be genuinely wrong. Against my better judgment, I answered on the fourth call. "Finally!" Janet's voice was sharp with frustration. "I've been trying to reach you all evening. We need to talk, and it can't wait until tomorrow." "It's nearly midnight, Janet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever you need to discuss can wait until morning." "No, it can't." Her tone was different from usual, more urgent and less of the sickeningly sweet concern she'd been affecting lately. "I know you've been talking to people about me, making accusations." My blood went cold. How could she possibly know about my conversation with the bank, or tonight's planning session with David and Patricia? "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play games with me. I got a very interesting call this afternoon from someone at First National, asking me to clarify my relationship to you and the nature of my concerns about your mental state. They seemed to think I'd been making inappropriate inquiries." I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of relief and terror. The bank had followed through on their promise to investigate, but now Janet knew I'd exposed her. "I simply asked them to look into some unusual activity on my account." "Unusual activity?" Janet's voice rose. "I was trying to help you. You've been so confused lately, making mistakes with your bills, forgetting our conversations. I was worried you might be taken advantage of by scammers, or worse." The gaslighting was so blatant now that it almost seemed comical, except for how effectively it had worked on me for months. "I haven't been confused about anything, Janet. But I am confused about why my friend would contact my bank behind my back." "Because you're not thinking clearly." The pretense of gentle concern was completely gone now. You need someone looking out for your interests, and I've been doing exactly that. If you can't see that, it proves my point about your judgment being compromised. I found myself gripping the phone tighter. Even now, even caught red-handed, she was trying to twist this into evidence of my incompetence. What exactly did you hope to accomplish by calling my bank? There was a long pause. When Janet spoke again, her voice was calmer, more calculating. I wanted them to be aware that you might be vulnerable to financial exploitation. That if anyone tried to make unusual changes to your accounts or access your funds, they should contact me first as your closest friend and emergency contact. The audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. She'd been trying to position herself as a gatekeeper to my own finances, all under the guise of protection. You had no right to do that, I said finally. I had every right as someone who cares about you, and frankly, your reaction to my concern only validates my worry. A reasonable person would be grateful to have someone watching out for them. I thought about David and Patricia, about our timeline of Janet's manipulative behavior, about the months of self-doubt she'd carefully cultivated in me. The anger I'd felt earlier returned, stronger now. You're right that I need people watching out for me, I said. I just need to make sure they're the right people. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm going to be more careful about who I trust going forward. Another long pause. I think you should know that I'm not the only one who's noticed changes in you lately. Other people have expressed concerns too. The threat was barely veiled. She was claiming to have allies, other people who would back up her claims about my mental state. Whether it was true or another manipulation tactic, it sent a chill through me. I think this conversation has gone on long enough, I said. We're not finished talking about this. I'm coming over tomorrow morning so we can discuss this properly, face to face. No, you're not. The firmness in my own voice surprised me. I need some space to think, Janet. I don't want any visits right now. You can't just shut me out when I'm trying to help you. I can, actually. This is my home and my life. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. Almost immediately, it started ringing again. I turned it off entirely and sat in the dark silence of my bedroom, processing what had just happened. Janet's mask had finally slipped completely. The caring friend act was over, replaced by someone who sounded angry at being thwarted and determined to regain control of the situation. Her threat about other people having concerns felt ominous, and I wondered how many people she'd been talking to about my supposed decline. Sleep felt impossible now. I made another cup of tea and sat in my living room, looking out at the empty street and trying to prepare myself for whatever Janet might do next. She'd sounded desperate on the phone, and desperate people were unpredictable. I was still sitting there when I saw headlights turn onto my street. The car moved slowly, as if the driver was looking for something, and my heart started pounding when it pulled into my driveway. I froze as the car door slammed shut. Through the window, I could see Janet's familiar silhouette walking up my front path. She knocked loudly, the sound echoing through my quiet house. Sarah, I know you're awake. I saw the lights on. We need to talk about this properly. I stayed completely still, hoping she would give up and leave, but the knocking continued, more insistent now. Sarah, this is ridiculous. Open the door. I'm not going anywhere until we sort this out. After several more minutes of knocking, I heard her footsteps moving around the side of the house. My blood ran cold as I realized she was checking if any other doors were unlocked. The back door handle rattled. Janet, I called out, my voice shaky. You need to leave. I told you I need space. And I told you we're not finished talking, she called back through the door. You're being completely unreasonable about this. I'm trying to help you. I grabbed my phone and turned it back on, my hands trembling as I scrolled to David's number. It was nearly midnight, but I was scared. David? I whispered when he answered. I'm sorry to wake you, but Janet is at my house. She won't leave and she's trying to get in. What? Hold on, I'm getting dressed. Are your doors locked? Yes, but she's walking around checking them. I think she might try the windows next. I'm on my way. Stay on the phone with me. I could hear him moving around, probably grabbing his keys. David, she was so different on the phone earlier, angry and threatening. She said other people have concerns about me too. Don't listen to that manipulation, Sarah. Can you still hear her outside? I listened carefully. The house had gone quiet. I don't hear anything now. Maybe she left? I'm pulling onto your street now. Her car is still in your driveway, but I don't see her. Relief flooded through me. Thank you for coming. I was really scared. You should be scared. This behavior is completely unhinged. I heard car doors slamming outside, then raised voices. I crept to the front window and peered through the curtain. David was standing by Janet's car, and she was walking back from behind my house, looking furious. What are you doing here, David? Janet's voice carried clearly in the night air. Sarah called me because you're harassing her. It's midnight, Janet. What's wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm concerned about my friend who's clearly having some kind of breakdown and won't accept help. By stalking her house when she asked you to leave her alone? I wasn't stalking. I was trying to have a conversation with someone I care about. I opened my front door, feeling braver with David there. Both of them turned to look at me. Janet, I asked you not to come over. I asked you to give me space. What part of that was unclear? She threw her hands up. The part where you're acting completely paranoid and irrational. David, you should be concerned too. Look at her behavior tonight. Does this seem normal to you? David stepped closer to her. What seems abnormal is you calling her bank behind her back and then showing up at her house uninvited at midnight when she asked you to stay away. I never called her bank. The lie came so quickly and confidently that for a moment I almost doubted what I'd learned. But David's expression didn't change. The bank manager confirmed it was you, Janet. They have records of your calls and your claims that Sarah was incompetent. Janet's face went pale in the porch light. That's not what happened. I was just expressing concern. I never said she was incompetent. You told them she was forgetting to pay bills and making poor financial decisions. You suggested they should limit her account access. Because I was worried. Look at how she's acting now. This paranoid response proves I was right to be concerned. I felt my anger flare again. My response is because I discovered you've been lying to me and manipulating me for months. You've been undermining my confidence and then calling it concern. I have not been manipulating you. The grocery store incident, Janet. You told me I left my purse at home when you saw me put it in the cart. You're misremembering that. The restaurant where you said I made a scene about my order when I barely spoke to the server. You were being difficult. The medication mix-up where you insisted I'd confused my pills when you were the one who handed me the bottle. Janet looked back and forth between David and me, and I could see her trying to calculate her next move. You're both ganging up on me because I dared to express concern about Sarah's well-being. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking I was worried about. David shook his head. Janet, what you did was wrong. Calling someone's bank without permission isn't expressing concern. It's a serious violation of trust and privacy. And showing up here after I asked you not to, I added, that's not concern either. That's controlling behavior. Janet was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mask trying to slip back into place. Sarah, I'm sorry if my methods were wrong, but my intentions were good. I've been so worried about you, and I didn't know what else to do. What you could have done, I said firmly, was talk to me directly instead of going behind my back. What you could have done was respect my boundaries when I asked for space. You're right, she said, but her voice lacked real conviction. I was just so scared something was wrong that I overreacted. I studied her face in the porch light. Even now, apologizing, there was something calculating in her expression. Like she was trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. I think you should go home now, David said. Sarah's made it clear she needs space to think. Janet looked at me one more time. Will you call me tomorrow, so we can talk properly? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to preserve what was left of our friendship, but I also knew I couldn't trust her anymore. I don't think so, Janet. I need time to process all of this. Her face hardened slightly before she caught herself. Fine, but I hope you'll realize eventually that everything I did came from a place of caring. She walked to her car without another word. David and I watched as she backed out of my driveway and disappeared down the street. Are you okay? David asked as we went inside. I think so. Thank you for coming. I was really scared when she started checking my doors and windows. That behavior was completely out of line. Normal people don't do that when asked to leave. I sank onto my couch, exhaustion hitting me all at once. The worst part is how she almost had me convinced again with that apology. Even knowing what she's done, part of me wanted to believe her intentions were good. That's because you're a good person who wants to see the best in people. But Janet's shown you who she really is. Someone who lies, manipulates, and violates boundaries while claiming it's for your own good. I nodded, feeling sad but also relieved. I keep thinking about how many times she made me doubt myself, how many situations where I thought I was going crazy or misremembering things. That's called gaslighting, and it's a form of psychological abuse. The fact that you recognized it and stood up to her tonight shows how strong you really are. We talked for another hour before David finally went home. I managed to get a few hours of sleep, and in the morning, I called Patricia to fill her in on everything that had happened. I can't believe she showed up at your house like that, Patricia said. That's genuinely frightening behavior. I know, and even after being caught in all these lies, she's still trying to make it seem like she was just being a caring friend. Have you thought about what you want to do going forward? About the friendship, I mean. I had been thinking about it. I don't think I can trust her anymore. Even if her intentions really were good at the beginning, the way she went about everything was so wrong. And her reaction when confronted shows me she's not genuinely sorry. That sounds like a healthy decision. It's hard to end a friendship, but sometimes it's necessary. Over the next few days, Janet tried calling several times, but I didn't answer. She left voicemails that alternated between apologetic and accusatory, which only confirmed that I'd made the right choice. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and trusting my own perceptions. If someone in your life is constantly making you doubt yourself, question your memory, or feel like you're losing your mind, pay attention to that feeling. Real friends don't systematically undermine your confidence or go behind your back while claiming it's for your own good. I also learned the importance of having people like David and Patricia in my life. Friends who support and validate you rather than constantly making you feel inadequate. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time, even if their words say something different. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is, even if you can't immediately prove it or put your finger on what's bothering you.